Divas, what a week. And to help us break it all down, two new special guests to the show for a Reporter Roundtable with Politico's Kimberly Leonard and the Miami Herald's Ceballos. That's right. Two of the best sourced reporters in Florida. They'll be offering deep insights into the showdown between Governor Ron DeSantis and legislative leaders, House Speaker Daniel Perez and Senate President Ben Albritton. We'll hear all about how we got here, where we are, and where we're headed. Please join me with Anna and Kim for a deeper dive into not one, but two special sessions.
This is something the governor hasn't had to deal with before. One of the reasons that he was always kind of able to get his way in Florida is because the legislature pretty much did whatever he asked. If there was any argument, it usually was happening behind closed doors or privately to reporters. And so to have something break out this openly is not something the governor is used to.
You're listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida. Let's dive in.
Divas, oh my gosh, what a week, what a week, what a week. And with me this morning, I've got two superstars. We're having a reporter roundtable this morning, and I have two superstars. They're new to the show, but they certainly are not new to Florida politics. Kim Leonard, your Politico reporter and the author of the very popular Politico playbook, and Ceballos, a Tallahassee reporter with the Miami Herald Capitol Bureau. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I'm so excited to be here.
That was Anna first and Kim second. I guess I should have done a separate introductions, but that's okay. That's how we roll. It's early this morning, and we have had a popcorn emoji filled week this week, haven't we?
It has been quite the marathon off the week.
Yeah. And you actually, Anna, I mean, let's just give a little recap. Who wants to start with the recap? We gavelled in for, well, I guess I will. We gavelled in for a first special session on immigration, a lot of speculation about what was going to happen. And then boom. How about Anna? Let's let you give us a little recap on what happened next.
And what took place on Monday. So I think there was I think it would be best to start from 2 weeks ago, right, when DeSantis first called a special session, and there was initial pushback from Republican leaders, and then there was a lot of suspense. No one really knew what was going to happen on Monday. So we all gather in. All lawmakers are back in the House. State senators are in the Senate. We're all ready to see
no bills. We hadn't seen any bills. Nothing.
Bills. Well, there were some bills from lawmakers, but leadership had not said what they were going to be actually supporting. Correct?
I think those bills came out Sunday, right?
Yes, Sunday.
Right.
I believe it was 8 bills from one senator, Senator Blaise Ignolia from Spring Hill, and he filed essentially 8 separate immigration bills that covered everything that the governor had really requested lawmakers do during special session. So come Monday, everyone's just really wondering. There's radio silence coming from both the Senate president and the House Speaker, and no one really has. I mean, there's a lot of speculation, but no one really had a real clear idea as to what they were going to do. And they gavel in, gavel out on the governor's special session call, and immediately gavel in their own special session with their own drawn-up immigration proposal, which is what was it initially? It was like 80 pages long. It's includes all sorts of things in relation to that would essentially restructure how the state responds to immigration enforcement, but more notably was pretty much transferring much of the oversight authority that the governor has over immigration to the Agriculture Commission.
Right.
In the state, which was a bombshell.
That was the big middle finger to the governor, right? That's
correct.
Yeah. Then more drama. Kim, what?
Right.
Yeah, let Anna. Let you finish and get us to where we are, because to be honest, really, Monday feels like a year ago already.
Yeah, Monday feels like a year ago, and it feels like we're still very much in the middle of it, right? I mean, they ended a special session by, pushing through these proposals that leadership proposed on Monday. They passed them on Tuesday, but now the messaging wars are very much in full swing as of Friday morning, and there's really no clear idea as to what's going to happen next.
Yeah, the messaging war is still ramping up. Kim, what are your thoughts about what we've seen so far? You're you've been busy, I know, documenting all of this, and it's been kind of like a ping pong game.
I mean, listen, this is something the governor hasn't had to deal with before. One of the reasons that he was always kind of able to get his way in Florida is because the legislature pretty much did whatever he asked. If there was any argument, it usually was happening behind closed doors or privately to reporters. And so to have something break out this openly is not something the governor is used to. And to do it in such a showy fashion, it's actually very DeSantis style, the way that they've all rolled this out and passed it through. And it's all been pretty nasty, and it's been, I tried to call, they tried to call, we couldn't get in touch, etc.
I'm a liar. You're a liar. No, you're a liar. No, you're a liar. I mean, they actually use the word lying. They're accusing each other of lying. So the rhetoric is very heated.
Exactly. And I would say the biggest factor, which we focused on for Politico pretty early on in the week, is that both sides were claiming to have Trump's blessing.
That's right.
And Trump himself has just not weighed in. I don't know if he's going to, let the kids figure it out, or if he's going to impulsively post something on Truth Social. But that, of course, could be a huge change in terms of whether they're able to come together or not on something, or whether they just drag it out through the session. It does seem as though there's been a lot of bitterness by certain folks built up over time. This doesn't just happen. It's not just a sudden thing. The governor has always done these big surprises during his time in office, and gotten a lot of headlines and gotten his way. And so the only difference now is that he's getting pushback from within his own party.
I think you're right. I mean, this has been simmering tensions simmering since he really, I guess, over the past 6 years in his tenure as governor. He has demanded that his style is different. He doesn't walk the halls on you and both of you are probably newer to politics. For sure, you are newer to politics in Florida than I am. And you may not remember the days when governors actually walked the halls to talk to legislators to get their agenda through. The governor never did that. He would call people down to his office. You never saw him roving the halls of the House and Senate office buildings. He vetoed their congressional amendment. He also kind of shames them on things that he disagrees with them. And I think that smarts over time. They kind of get a little resentful. The House Speaker Daniel Perez yesterday, we're recording this Friday morning, and the governor, I just need to warn the divas that the governor does have something scheduled at 11 a.m. and we're recording this at 9 a.m. So goodness only knows if everything we say, I mean, who knows, right? But he's pledged to veto the bill. He's called it weak, empathetic, weak sauce. He particularly takes umbrage at what he says stripping him of immigration enforcement authority and giving it to the agriculture commissioner, who he basically accused of cultivating illegal immigration or enticing, not enforcing it adequately at a minimum. But I mean, there's been personal jabs too, right? And then yesterday he threatened to primary. He didn't say it this way. He said it in the reverse. I'm going to use my political committee to support people in gubernatorial and legislative primaries who basically support my agenda. And House Speaker Danny Perez from your neck of the wood, your newspaper is his hometown newspaper, Anna. So tell us what his reaction to that was.
So the reaction to all of this, or I guess the reaction to that specifically?
All of it. I mean, he came out swinging yesterday.
So he was very tight-lipped, right? Even during session, they were very much coordinating the messaging between the House and the Senate, sending joint statements through their spokespeople. They were not really, talking. They did not talk to reporters after they passed the bill, which is like something rare.
Yeah, they didn't gaggle,
Usually.
right?
Right. There's, sometimes they don't meet with reporters in the midst of it or at the beginning of it, but almost it's guaranteed that they would do it once it's approved or once they achieved what they wanted to achieve. But they didn't do that. And I did have the opportunity. It was brief, but we did have the opportunity to sit down with him the day after they passed the piece of legislation. And, he keeps saying, he's doubling down on his defense of he truly believes that what they passed is good, that he maintains that, they collaborated with the Trump administration, which is why they added some extra provisions to these to the immigration bill at the last minute on Tuesday. He's really hammering home that that he believes the legislature is proposing a stronger immigration proposal for enforcement than Governor Ron DeSantis, and that the legislature's proposal includes the funding and the exact things that the Trump administration would need to deport more people, including funding for detention, which would facilitate ICE to come in and pick up people who are undocumented in the state. At this point, right, I mean, it's like Kimberly said, where they really are trying to be the most Trumpy of all, right? Like, my proposal is the one that stands for Trump. No, my proposal is Trump is not weighing in. So it just really right now is up to the public perception really on who they're going to side with, because both bills, they each have provisions that would be stronger than the other, weaker than the other. Like, really, like either one would be stronger than what we have right now. So it's just kind of about a messaging as to what exactly would you like to be, what do you want to see done?
Kim, what do you think about who's winning the messaging war right now? I don't know if you all were on that call with the REC chairs yesterday, but there were a lot of DeSantis talking points in those questions. And I have heard that there's a lot of dissatisfaction among the REC chairs about this public rift and that the legislature isn't going along with DeSantis's plan.
Yeah, exactly. I think with Republicans, look, they're in a super majority right now. So that means a lot of the fights that you're going to see happen politically are going to be internal because the Democrats are just so outnumbered, right? So there definitely are people, and this is where, Speaker Perez might be at a disadvantage. Governor DeSantis does remain really popular in Florida. People tune into what he says. They listen to him on Fox News. They know him. A lot of people, too, also feel, well, this is great. We get DeSantis as governor and Trump as president. And so when he goes out and says, well, Trump's on my side, a lot of lawmakers I talk to are then getting phone calls that say, why don't you agree with the governor and the president? So they are receiving those calls. And internally, the grassroots sort of feels like, well, why are we fighting internally? We don't want to be in the middle of this. It's sort of hearkening back to the time when DeSantis was running against Trump and everyone kind of felt caught in the middle, or they were taking sides. So it's very tense. And I don't know who comes out on top. Trump would be a tiebreaker, obviously. But DeSantis isn't known for backing down. And we don't really know Perez's style as well yet. But clearly, he is also going at this the same way the governor is, by doing various media appearances and by talking about it. And that could break through. But again, the governor has so much name recognition. And so he's working off of that. That doesn't mean that he is winning. It just means that that is a point in his favor, an advantage that he has going into this fight.
He also, the speaker, and feel free to weigh in at any time, Anna. I mean, we're having a conversation, so you guys interrupt me, please. You know, that's part of my culture is interrupting. But the speaker has been very pointed in his criticism of the governor. I love when they say, you know, he's a great governor and he's done great things. And oh, by the way, you know, this is the guy who didn't want Trump to return to the White House. The best, I think that the speaker did say yesterday in one of his appearances that you know, Trump is the best president in the history of the country, and that DeSantis tried to keep him from returning to the White House. So why do you think you Politico, you guys have connections deep in Washington. Why do you think that Trump or someone from his administration hasn't signaled as of this recording yet? What, you know, this has gone on for days now. Why haven't they taken a side, I guess?
Well, look, I think part of it is everything that's happening back in Washington. Number one, that horrible plane crash.
Well, that's true. That's true.
And then a lot of the, you know, confirmation hearings.
They're busy,
through.
Maybe? Yeah.
Well, I think that's a part of it. And then, you know, on top of that, I think that sometimes trying to read into what the president does or how he feels or why he's doing things is difficult, because a lot of times it's so impulsive, right? So he could be telling his staff, listen, I'm going to stay out of this. But then he could just change his mind and post something on Truth Social at 1 a.m. So that is the way that he operates. I do know that DeSantis has tried to sort of mend things because he is trying to create this collaborative, I want to be out front with Trump situation. But that doesn't mean that the legislature is just going to let him do it, as we're clearly seeing.
And I do think it's important, you know, when the legislature released their proposal and caught, presumably DeSantis by surprise, right on Monday, DeSantis immediately started calling supporters. And one phone call on Monday night, he told supporters that he had personally talked to Trump about this and that Trump only told him that he just wanted the strongest version as possible. But he didn't really say, he suggested that that the governor believed that his was stronger. So of course people should support his, but he did not even indicate whether or not Trump in private conversations was siding with either the governor or the legislature, right? And then we saw the next day the legislature come up with those amendments to make it more aligned to what the White House wanted or what the Trump administration wanted. I am told that those were conversations with Stephen Miller, not necessarily, I don't know, Perez. I asked him specifically who he talked to or who the Senate talked to, and he said that he was not going to share that information. So I really don't know exactly who the legislature has been talking to and how the campaign to kind of get Trump to chime in is going at this point, which I thought, and I don't, you know, maybe it's an inside baseball thing, but obviously, you know, the bill hasn't been sent to the governor. Which begs to the question, you know, like what are they waiting for if he already said he's going to veto? Could they be potentially waiting for Trump to weigh in? Are they trying to whip votes to make sure they can override the veto? You know, there's all sorts of possibilities as to what the game plan could be.
I don't think they have the votes in the Senate to override the veto. I thought that the speaker said yesterday that he talked to Holman about the bill, and I could be wrong. I did speak with Senator Joe Gruters. Gosh, again, the days run away. I think Wednesday, the day after the bill was passed, and he told me that he spoke directly with President Trump about this, and that he also spoke with other people in the administration on the details, and that the president wanted a more I think after the original bill came out Monday, the president wanted something harder. And so that's why we saw this revamped bill that includes the death penalty and other elements that, Anna, I'd like you to address later on, because we're so focused. on the politics, some of us, I confess that I am one of those, that I am not really focusing right now on what's in the bill. And then there's a part of me that feels like, well, if he's going to, if the governor's going to veto it, I'm not sure how. And immigration laws vary, as you know, Anna, you've been covering this for many years. Very complicated part of a complicated law, right?
Not just that, but it's changing very quickly right now under the Trump administration.
That's right.
Right, with executive orders. So it's really difficult to even discern whether or not they're able to do the things that they want to do right now, or if they will be able to do it in the future, but they're legislating for future actions, which is something that DeSantis has very much I've already seen a pattern in the last week with the Trump orders. DeSantis said he had talked to the president, and so he knew it was coming. So he was planning and tailoring the state law to what was coming. But that was the main concern that I even heard from law enforcement in Florida and from Republican leaders who were saying, we can't, we need to see what's going to be in place before we put stuff in statute, right? I mean, we have to be able to know what we're responding to and what we're tailoring to. We can't just take someone by their word that they know what's coming without it being the lay of the land.
And those policies are still being developed in Washington, right?
They're still being developed. They're still being analyzed as to what they could potentially mean, and they're still being litigated, right? Or expected to be litigated. So it's just, there's so much up in the air right now. Just last week, Trump said, the Trump administration issued a memo from the Department of Homeland Security that would essentially allow states that are willing to be deputized to do more enforcement on federal immigration law. But we talked to immigration attorneys, and they're like, this has never been done, right? So expect lawsuits to see exactly what the scope of it will be. But DeSantis has shown he's willing, right? But then the other aspect of all of this is that I think, and we heard it a lot from Republican lawmakers this week, was that there's a concern of how far DeSantis wants to go with these new directives, right? I mean, I think there was a lot of hesitance, for example, to give him the power to deport people to foreign countries. That could be a foreign policy headache. If Colombia, for example, doesn't want to take deportees and DeSantis is sending them anyway, would that cause a headache at the federal level? How does that work? How does that dynamic work with an eager governor who's just ready to go on immigration? If the legislature gives him those powers, would he go and get in trouble with Trump or not?
Right. And we've seen he is, obviously very ambitious. We don't know, he's termed out in 2 years. So Kim, all of this that's going on, and Anna, I'm going to bring you in on this too. But first, Kim, the 2026 elections are looming large over all of this. There's so many layers to these stories. I'm finding it very difficult to turn something in that's less than 1,500 words, which is, But, talk about how much 2026 is looming over this, because let's face it, one of the reasons folks want to please Donald Trump and carry out his immigration agenda is not only because Republicans, these are very conservative Republicans who are in control of the Florida House and the Florida Senate, Speaker Daniel Perez and President Ben Albritton, but they if you have a future ambition in the next couple of years in running for some office, you want the president's endorsement, right? So how much does the 2026 elections, how much is that playing into this?
Oh my goodness. It's a huge factor and it can't be ignored. And I think when we report on this, we have to keep stressing that to people just so they know what the undercurrents are. Listen, DeSantis, one of the reasons that he's governor now is because Trump endorsed him in 2018. Not one of the reasons, probably the reason
right.
He's governor today. Even though he went on to deny it on podcasts when he was running for president, it's just undeniable the way that he went up in the polls. And Trump showed up for him at a lot of rallies across Florida. Now, obviously, he ran against him. It was very bitter. Now they're saying things are mended-ish. hard to know.
I don't know.
exactly how
Ask Susie Wiles about that, but go ahead.
Right. I mean, it could be one of those keep your enemies close situations. But they have golfed together, and it was over a game of golf that DeSantis got Trump to put out that initial Truth Social that said, "Thank you so much for calling a special session."
Right.
So there's that. Now we see people like Wilton Simpson, who hasn't said, I mean, you tried very hard to get him to talk about it during your last podcast. I was giggling. I was thinking, okay, here we go. He would not touch it, but he did also say, look, Trump's endorsement would be very important. And I think one thing that's undeniable is if he were to have this chief immigration officer title that, and do it in a way that, do the job in a way that Trump approves of, that might help him get Trump's endorsement.
In the governor's race. Yeah.
Exactly. If he were to choose to run for governor, I don't think it was an accident. I don't think it was, all these explanations that they're giving about, here's why agriculture can make sense.
Let's not forget that Senator Gruters said that on the Senate floor, right? He said it's not a secret that Simpson has political aspirations. So I think he's going to make Trump very happy with how he does the job of the state's chief immigration officer, meaning that he's going to aim to please with this job, right? And I feel like that was the elephant in the room in terms of politics in 2016, was very much openly admitted there by Gruters.
And oh, by the way, Senator Joe Gruters, a former chairman of the Republican Party, who is close to Donald Trump and who is the sponsor of the legislation, the Senate sponsor, is running for chief financial officer in 2026 and already has Trump's endorsement in that race, right?
And the seat is currently, it isn't
soon to be
yet, but it's about to be. Soon to be. And so DeSantis will soon have the job of appointing someone to CFO. He and Gruters have famously not gotten along for years, so Gruters is not going to get it, but DeSantis could pick one of his own allies. And does that person then at that point have a leg up in the GOP primary in 26? Compared to the Trump endorsement, I'm not so sure. But I think one of the reasons DeSantis is feeling confident is because he won the fight narrowly, but he did win the fight against the abortion and marijuana amendments. And so I think that gave him this sort of outlook where he said, well, I can convince people. I think that's how he's looking at 26. He's already thinking about who's going to be succeeding him. And he's talking about primarying people all the way down the ballot. And he doesn't get along with Wilton Simpson either. So it's all, very personal, having Gruters introduce it and putting Simpson at the top of an office that would get a lot of attention, and it would get Trump's attention especially. And what's interesting on top of that is you saw Byron Donalds yesterday weigh in on Dave Rubin's podcast.
Yes.
And he said he agreed with DeSantis and they had a bit of a falling out, et cetera. I mean, the relationships are complicated here, right? But it's all connected. It's not just working in a vacuum. There is a sort of longer term outlook about how all the puzzle pieces fit together.
Yeah. And Byron Donalds, of course, is another potential gubernatorial candidate in 2026 who also is very close with Donald Trump.
Who has said that the immigration power should stay with the governor after the governor said
that's right,
that every single person thinking about running for governor in 2016 should comment on this proposal.
It's interesting, right? I mean, it's fascinating, and it's like the Sharks and the Jets are it's like the Crips and the Bloods, really. It's more like the Crips and the Bloods than the Sharks and the Jets at this point.
That's a great visual.
Yeah. Just because they're lining up, and what makes it kind of delicious for political, observers is that the Republicans have been in lockstep for many years now, and we're seeing this open, public, very public, brutal break. And that is just fascinating to those of us who our Capitol insiders. But Anna, I wanted to ask you, these are real people that we're talking about. These immigration policy, whatever they're going to do, is going to be something, I'm guessing, that's going to be harsh. We're already seeing crackdowns by ICE. The governor, he's using his state agencies to help federal authorities detain folks. I'm not sure. He has criticized the legislation that passed as being too focused on criminal immigrants who are in the country illegally or without documentation. He says, he basically, like, if they're here, they aren't supposed to be here, it doesn't matter whether they've done anything wrong. What are your thoughts?
One of the things that has kind of caught my attention, at least in with the messaging wars, is that one of the things that DeSantis keeps taking issue with on this piece of legislation is kind of the assistance that the state would be giving locals to house more immigrants who are in the country illegally and detain them and hold them for ICE to pick up. He keeps saying, the governor has said multiple times at this point, I don't want to detain people, I want to deport them. The problem is that there is still federal laws that need to be followed, that Congress will set. It's not, Trump can do a lot of things through executive orders, but Congress ultimately will be governing the federal immigration laws, right? And there's due process in those laws. When an immigrant who's here illegally is detained by law enforcement, and there has to be a process by which they are given like the proper documentation to let them know they are going to be deported. There's proceedings, I guess. And
yes, there's a process to how we go about this. And it's federally, there's this is federal law is in control of immigration. I think it's important to remember that, right?
It's important to remember. And I think it's important to know that when DeSantis says that, it's really unclear what he means, right? Because, okay, well, if you don't want to detain people, and you want the state to have the power to deport, and you're taking the Trump order so far as him giving you that power, if you're willing, then like what laws is he like kind of following in terms of, is he looking at, is he just like following Trump's orders? Like would he, like what exactly, how is he planning to operate? And these laws, right, a lot of what the legislature is proposing is really kind of catering to a lot of what locals and the Trump administration has been saying, that the number one priority should be criminals. And so if you detain criminals and you can house them longer, you can afford to house them longer, then it will be making it easier for ICE to come and pick them up and deport them. DeSantis is upset about that, right? Saying, that he doesn't want to detain, he wants to deport. And so that's kind of like an interesting perspective, I guess, into the boring procedural bureaucracy aspects of what it would take to deport someone to get the mission done.
When you're saying house them, I mean, they would be incarcerated, right? Or
correct.
Okay, so it's not like we're
county jails,
right? So we're not like setting them up in a condo downtown with the flat screen TV or anything.
Right.
One of the things that I have heard legislators and other high-ranking cabinet legislators mostly, but observers who are close to people on the plaza level, is that lawmakers, one of the reasons why they selected the agriculture commissioner for this enforcement role is DeSantis he has used his executive authority in ways that that we are not familiar with in Florida. And, he has he revived the state guard. He has his own, he created the election police. He has suspended a number of constitutionally elected officials around the state. I think they have expressed to me a concern about the expansion of executive authority in the governor's office. Have you guys heard anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I heard it very much publicly as well. I was fascinated by the fact that for the first time, really, Republican lawmakers were expressing and airing out their grievances as to how they thought DeSantis was not effective even in carrying out some of his own immigration initiatives. They were complaining about how the administration was giving the power to crack down on businesses that don't use E-Verify to check the eligibility of workers.
That's right.
And they're like, he hasn't even sent letters. Oh, but by the way, he sent 48 letters all of a sudden on Wednesday. That don't really note a violation. They're just saying, FYI, you may be in noncompliance, including Trulieve, which was like the marijuana company that he feuded with in the election. So there's also concerns about that he was not transparent enough with how he used the migrant relocation program, which was, they gave him $12 million to do that. And they said, we don't know what he's done with that money. Usually that was concerns that Democrats would bring up. And now it's Republicans are starting to talk about how they don't think DeSantis has been effective with carrying out those proposals, but rather just getting attention for those proposals.
And Kim, I mean, while the Republican legislators might not like that, and they might start they've threatened, at least a couple of them, to sort of dig into the governor's finances and the way that he's choosing to spend the money that's been allocated to him. Do you think that that Joe Lunchbucket down in Miami, who's a huge DeSantis fan, do you think all this is just noise to them? Do you think they care?
I think that they care, and I think that probably they are thinking about it more from the governor's perspective. You know, he's really barnstorming the state. He's going on Fox News. He's doing all of the things that he's done in the past to get his message out that have worked for him before. I will say that, I think concerns about the governor's power is part of it, but I also, again, I think it is also political. I think they're trying to squeeze him and dare him to oppose the legislation, to veto it he's never going to let Wilton Simpson be the immigration officer. That's just not going.
No world is that going to happen, right?
So we can't act like, oh, they really thought of it. They thought it through, and that's why they picked the ag commissioner. No, they knew it was going to be a dig, and they knew it was going to be a middle finger. So I think we need to acknowledge that piece of that. And the governor's better known than the agriculture commissioner right now. I mean, he ran for president, and I didn't visit all the state. I wasn't the DeSantis campaign reporter for Politico, but when I was in Iowa, a lot of the folks who were voting for Trump kept saying, I like DeSantis second best, and he's young, so he can come back in the future. So I don't know so much, and I don't think he had the same reception in New Hampshire, for example, but I don't think it was all that people were negative toward him and his policies. I mean, they see him as MAGA, really, so even though he ran against Trump, they see him as aligned.
Right.
And he's trying to show that he's aligned. So again, and this is folks who aren't necessarily following things all the time, but they like the governor a lot. I mean, I still, I live in the Miami area. I still hear from a lot of people who said, I moved here during COVID and I'm just so happy that I did that because I could work. I hear that every week from people. So it matters. You remember when you made a big life change to be able to build a better life for yourself. And that's how a lot of people still think about it. I know that we have a lot of cost issues. Of course, I experience it too. However, again, this is big picture. How are they perceiving it? And perception isn't always matched up with, how things are going in reality. But perception is a big part of politics, and it's very effective.
Yeah, I talk about my New Jersey cousins. They love DeSantis. They're just like, they can't wait to move down to Florida to vote for him. And we will be right back with Ana Ceballos and Kimberly Leonard. The news in haikus. Weak and pathetic. Strongest, most conservative. Messaging war flares. The news in haikus. Don't forget, we'd love to hear your haiku. You can slide them into my DMs, or you can send them to podcasts, that's podcasts with an S, at e.newsserviceflorida.com. Wherever you're listening, please don't forget to subscribe and give us a rating if you like what we're doing. Thanks for joining us for this week's Reporter Roundtable. We're back now with Kimberly Leonard, author of Politico Playbook, and Ana Ceballos, Capitol reporter with the Miami Herald. We're talking about the political aspirations of DeSantis here, partially some of the other folks. What about Ben Albritton and Danny Perez? I had heard that Danny Perez might be interested in running for mayor of Miami, which would be a powerful position, but maybe he has something bigger in his sights. Do you have any insight into that, Anna?
Not quite, but he's clearly, trying to make a name for himself. Like, this is his first of 2 years in power. He's coming in with a bang. Like, he's not,
Right.
He's clearly trying to make a name for himself, which would position him for, more of a high profile position in politics, whether or not he wants to go locally or federally or a state position. We shall see. Some have speculated that he might be trying to go the Marco Rubio route, right? Marco Rubio was a Florida House Speaker. Look at him now.
He was a U.S.
in the
Senator,
Trump
and now he's the
administration.
Secretary of State for the United States of
So-
America. So go Marco, huh? He really...
Right. So I don't know specifically what his plans are right now, but what is certain is that he is trying to make a name for himself as from day one.
Ben Albritton, understand he's a longtime agriculture family. I think it would be reasonable to expect that he might want to run for agriculture commissioner one day.
Well, how convenient then if Wilton Simpson were to go on and become governor. So I wonder if they thought about that. I don't know. What do y'all think?
Maybe.
And also, I think something that was interesting yesterday, Danny Perez said, we call him Danny, and like Mr. Speaker. So if you're listening, no offense, it's affectionately called Danny. So Speaker Perez said, like, basically not just no, but hell no, was he going to take out the Dreamers bit to appease Democrats and try to get enough votes to override in the House. I think he only had one Republican defector on the bill anyway.
For years, the Miami-Dade delegation, which he's part of, he's a Miami representative, has been a firewall for that repeal. It was initially championed by Janet Nunez, who's the DeSantis' lieutenant governor. She was a Miami state representative back in 2014, and she pushed for this bill and urged state lawmakers to make a difference with it. And 10 years later, right, we're seeing her reverse course, saying it's okay to repeal it, but the law has run its course.
Right.
But
that's the in-state tuition for Dreamers.
The in-state tuition for undocumented students, including Dreamers, right? And then it's you really saw I think it was one of the most emotional aspects of the special session, where we even heard from, Miami Republicans in the Senate who were saying, that they supported the bill in general, but they were like heartbroken or conflicted about the in-state tuition because it's such a big part of Miami, where, a lot of these students go to Miami-Dade College or Florida International University. They live in Miami.
Right.
So they had been a firewall, and they were no longer being able to stop it.
Yeah, I thought his remarks were, he was adamant about that is, they are not citizens, they're not residents, so they shouldn't be getting that tuition break. We are here at the end of this week of this special session. We still have, the governor is supposed to be laying out his budget. He has until Sunday to lay out his budget. That might be what he's doing this morning. So apologize for being behind on that, divas. But, these guys all have to work together for the next 2 years, but not even thinking that far ahead. There's a regular session that starts March 4th. And tell me, both of you, please, what do you think? It feels right now, sitting here Friday morning on a gray, foggy Friday morning at the Lafayette Park Bureau, it's hard to see how they emerge unanimous after the degree of hostility and vituperation that has been spewed this week. So tell me what you see going into the legislative session.
Oh boy, I just don't see DeSantis. He's known for holding grudges. I don't see him letting go, even if there is a resolution to this one specific proposal in the end. I feel like they're setting the table right now for the tone for the regular legislative session. In my interview with Danny, and we reported this on, I believe, Wednesday, so things might change already, right? But he talked about, property insurance, affordability issues that he really wants to focus on. But, I asked him, like, well, what else are you planning to do that could potentially, challenge DeSantis further? And there was mention, he didn't really say specifically, but he said, there has to be accountability of how we spend money, taxpayer dollars, and that includes every single agency. And that was the extent to what he said, but I would keep watching potential actions that could target some of the perks that DeSantis has gotten over the years from the legislature.
How about you, Kim? What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think they're going to open the books, do the oversight work they haven't done before. Randy Fine, before he heads off to Congress, is going out with a bang, and he's going to do a hearing. He chairs one of the oversight committees in the state Senate. He's going to do a hearing where he looks at how much time Governor DeSantis' staff spends on social media. So get the popcorn out for that. If they get called in, they could be asked about, their practices, and their whole team, the whole DeSantis team does pile on social media. They're all extremely online, as I put it in one of my newsletters this week. It's just always been there. Oh, yes. And it's always been their MO, right, to launch these attacks over social media. And they feel like it works for them. I think DeSantis likes it, that he likes the kind of, bulldogs for him on social media. So I think the oversight hearings, I also would not be shocked if they took up more budget items that DeSantis has vetoed and started to override them.
Well, let's remember that. I think that I didn't mention that, but that is one of the things they did this week. They, he zeroed out the legislative services budget, and they overrode that veto very quietly. Not a lot of discussion about it, but they, bada bing, bada boom, did it.
Yeah, let's see how DeSantis takes that into account in his budget proposal this week.
I'm guessing there's going to be a lot of budget hijinks on both sides coming up, so we'll have to sort of stay tuned on that. Well, tell me, what's on your legislative bingo cards going into the 60-day session that starts in March?
I would expect another special session. First of all, I want to start with that. I think we're going to get one. Don't they have a week off between a bunch of committee meetings? I think it'll be that week. And let's just not forget that lawmakers, this isn't their full-time job. And so whenever there's a special session, it is, disruptive, it's expensive, they have to bring staff in, et cetera. And so they've acted willing to go along with it in the past, but I don't know about y'all. I feel a little bit vindicated with how things have gone this past week, just because we have all been reporting that there are people in the legislature who've been unhappy with how the status quo was. And so to have them come out openly does, show, look, we weren't making up sources. We weren't just saying this, that we hear a lot from folks about the frustration. And look, it's not everybody. I think there are also people who are frustrated with leadership because they feel put in the middle. A lot of them just want to go back to their constituents and say, look at all these great projects I got funded. Look at this bill I got passed. And so all of the theater is taking attention away from that, and they have to fall in line. And then DeSantis does have a handful of folks who are still on his side. Now, a couple of them want things from him. They want appointments, et cetera. But there are buckets of people in the legislature as well. And I want to highlight that because I don't think it's everybody. I think they also have to keep in mind, if I want my bill brought up or considered, I have to go along with House and Senate leadership.
Well, also, they go home And they're going to be talking to especially the Republicans, their constituents who've been getting these phone calls, who were getting a town hall phone call from the governor where he's saying, look, these guys are screwing up my plan. You need to let them know. You know what I mean? So they're going to be hearing from their constituents who, as you say, I don't think you can overstate how popular he is among Republican voters. There might be some bitterness with the Republican legislators, some, not all, as you said, Kim, but he is still very popular.
And I don't think it's for the regular legislative session. I don't think this is the end for immigration, regardless, again, of what they do with this specific proposal. I think there's going to be more coming because it was such a big priority for Republicans across the country and in Florida, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just looking at the little silos that they could act, but also let's not forget that DeSantis also called the special session to do something on condo reforms, which is like a major issue going on in South Florida, and nothing was done on that issue. There's a lot of talk about doing something during regular session and also on property insurance, which are two huge issues impacting Floridians. I would just keep an eye on exactly what they do and whether there's going to be jabs digging at the governor or not on like how he first tried to address those issues, or jabs at Perez for how he tried to address the condo issue.
Well, I think on my legislative bingo card is condo reform, property insurance, and alpha male.
Alpha male.
Yeah.
2016 alpha male.
2026.
2026.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, speaking of 2026, I would love to hear Anna talk more about that banger story y'all did.
Yes.
About the lieutenant governor.
Yes.
Well, that's another part of my bingo card. If that were to happen, if Nunez does leave early, and DeSantis is already hinting that he's kind of mobilizing his fundraising apparatus to crown his heir apparent, definitely session would be a great time for like the candidates to line up.
Well, Anna, tell us about this story that you broke yesterday.
Sure. Well, two of my colleagues and I, we wrote a story about, there's a lot of talk about the Florida International University, which is the largest public university in South Florida, is probably going to be looking for its next president in the next few weeks or months. And Nunez is being potentially pushed for that position.
That's kind of been a rumor circulating for a while, right?
I've heard it for years.
It's been circulating for a while, but it looks like it's at this point, it kind of seems to be close. Like the timing seems to be now more than ever. There's all sorts of speculation in Tallahassee about whether or not, this is DeSantis' way of, finding someone else to kind of run for governor. That would be, his running mate or his second in command, or Nunez, this is a position that she's long wanted. This is her alma mater, so it's close to home. She's a Miami girl through and through, and we'll see.
And so who are you hearing? I'm sorry. I was just going to say, who are you hearing? Because I've heard someone in particular, a Miami person, who might be in line to take for a DeSantis appointment to LG.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I just haven't really heard or nailed anything specifically, but I mean, DeSantis does not have like a huge orbit around him. As we've noticed this week in the legislature. But I would say people like, Jay Collins is someone who has been trying to position himself even for like the U.S. Senate appointments.
How about Jose Oliva?
Jose Oliva has, he came out and swung against Perez this week, and DeSantis is very fond of him.
Yes.
I've also heard of, Paul Renner, they're close. I don't know. I mean, it's not a list, but those are the names that I can think of that are at least close to the governor.
I have a question, because other than the $1 million a year salary, which totally gets that, what is the incentive for her to get out? I mean, she had to renounce one of her biggest accomplishments as a legislator, by saying that she wanted.
I think she's done.
Governor.
I think she's done.
Do you think she's just done working with him? Or?
I think she's done with the whole Tallahassee scene. Anna, am I wrong?
I don't have those insights, but I mean, it's not a bad for someone who's from Miami, it's not a bad job to be the president of that university.
It's $1 million a year, man.
Right. And I mean, it's again, she at one point she even taught at the university, like she was an adjunct professor. I think she just cares for that, and it's a good place for her to be, if she wanted it to be. And she's well regarded at the university. So there's been suggestions that, if she's interested, that she would be like a strong contender. I don't know her thoughts as to why she would want to do that instead of, finishing out her time with DeSantis, but he's termed out and January 2027, and what will she do next?
I just had felt a lot of excitement around her and her corner when DeSantis was being talked about to go to Washington as defense secretary. I just felt her whole team kind of say, okay, good, this is her moment, this is it. Yeah, and so that's why I asked, well, then why would she do it? And I'm not,
well, she wasn't
I've heard this too. She wasn't picked.
Right. So it's what's in it for her at this point. And this is just me thinking out loud of, there was a lot of speculation that this could be her moment in time, and DeSantis picked Moody.
Sorry, I meant
when that she would become governor. She would become governor if he went to Washington as defense secretary. She would be governor, and that would set her up as the incumbent in 2026. I have heard that she would. I mean, as you say, we've for years been hearing about her and that job at FIU. And I mean, what would you rather have, $1 million a year job or a job where you have to campaign around Florida again, which is a huge state? Not an easy, there's going to be a lot of people in that gubernatorial primary. They're, just because you are an incumbent doesn't mean that these folks aren't going to challenge you. And I haven't spoken with her about it. I will say I haven't spoken with her directly about it at all.
Well, I haven't spoke to her directly, but the theme of today was politics, right? I mean, do you think her record, even though she endorsed the repeal of her own law in 2014 for in-state tuition for undocumented students, would someone like her with that record be able to fit into the MAGA world that kind of prioritizes tough on immigration proposals for a statewide rate? Would it be a tough battle to go and run for a seat like that with a record?
Yeah,
like that, even if she supported the repeal.
Right. And I think she still doesn't have the name recognition, I think, statewide. So I don't know. I mean, it's wait and see. Stay tuned. All right. Well, anything that we didn't cover that you guys think we need to hit on before we say goodbye to the divas and tell us what your favorite session snacks are?
Session snacks. We need better vending machines.
Well, your spouse sent some amazing key lime pie, and I'm grateful for that. It's my favorite dessert. It really made my day a lot better.
Oh,
to be able to have a nice key lime pie.
Oh, wow.
Good. Sorry, I probably ate it all.
Oh, geez. Well, as a type 1 diabetic, I will say that key lime pie is not on my meal plan, but that's okay. What are we going to be talking about next week?
Oof. I would say definitely DeSantis' budget, right? And I think some sort of conclusion to this.
Okay.
Nearing sight to this. I mean, I wonder if they're going to come back to the table and just kind of, once they let off all the steam out, whether they'll just do something else and just compromise in some way.
Kim?
We'll see.
I don't know. DeSantis is such a, he just stays on it, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't let it go ever.
I was
even surprised when he dropped out of the presidential race. I went to New Hampshire and then they're like, never mind. That was fun. I do kind of keep wondering, the big kind of overarching thing as well is what will happen back in Washington that'll then trickle down to what happens in Florida.
Yeah.
House members were in Doral at the Trump National Doral Resort early this week, and they were going over the reconciliation bill. And as someone who covered the attempt at the Affordable Care Act repeal when I worked up in Washington, a lot of these hearings and deliberations that they are making can very quickly turn the tide politically. And so there may be things that they're talking about now that they think are kind of the main topic du jour, but that can very quickly, where Democrats might find their footing better, can very quickly turn. And so I'm not even sure that's a next week thing, but that is a bigger theme. And I realize it's early. Trump has been in office just a couple of weeks, but just in my experience covering Washington, that's what I have found when, the messaging wars start to take place based on what exactly is happening up at the top.
Well, that's a really good insight, Kim. Thank you again, both Kimberly Leonard of Politico and Ana Ceballos, the Miami Herald Capitol Bureau. I really appreciate you joining. One last question. Kim, I just wanted to ask you, you're relatively new to Florida. You covered politics in D.C. I just wanted to ask you before we wrap, what is the biggest surprise here in the Sunshine State for you?
This is going to sound like such a small thing, but I'll just never forget the first DeSantis press conference that I went to, because I was used to covering Washington and going to a lot of these press conferences, and they would really narrow what you could ask. But I learned very quick, if you raise your hand and try to ask something off topic, they'll kind of swat you away. But I learned with DeSantis that he actually wants to be asked about the main question of the day. So that was the biggest change for me, because he knew that it was a headline for him. So I'll never forget, it was in West Palm Beach, and it was on January 6th. And everyone, it was something about vaccines. It was the 1-year anniversary of January 6th. And people were asking all kinds of questions about COVID. And I go, oh, okay. So I raised my hand and I said, oh, can you talk to me about January 6th, And I saw him kind of nod, and he was thinking, because he knew he wanted that question. There's a reason that he was in West Palm Beach. So with DeSantis, I'm always kind of watching not just what he's saying, but what the subliminal messages are, because I do think that, and I think part of this is the First Lady, that there is always an undercurrent of a separate narrative that's being told through images and places and so forth. And we're seeing that play out with the immigration debate. We saw it play out, with the presidential run. And so that was the biggest, I would say, change.
That's
versus,
really interesting.
Kind of seeing a bill introduced on Capitol Hill. We see DeSantis. I mean, I remember the prescription drug pricing, which still hasn't gone through, but in terms of being implemented. But he went in that warehouse and he goes, "We're ready."
Yeah.
Where's the, and so to me, that image, it's just something that I've been kind of hyper aware of, just because of the difference with Washington, where, the president is always just signing stuff in the Rose Garden versus telling us a story with the broader picture. And I just think it's an interesting way to read people, or to read him specifically.
Do you think he's going to emerge the winner in this standoff with the legislature?
Not if Trump comes in and backs.
Okay. It all depends on the big daddy. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I can't wait to have you both back on again. Some girl power here with the three of us. I really appreciate it. And everybody stay tuned. Thank you, Kim. And I hope to talk to you again soon. And thank you, Ana.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida. Hosted by News Service senior writer Dara Cam and produced by me, Mike Exline. Music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC.